back to the thing is this last value is also adjacent to the first value. So it's literally that simple. That's the only difference between house robber 1 and house robber 2. And actually the good thing is you can reuse the solution from house robber 1 to solve this problem. And I'm going to show you how. So let's just remember house robber 1 first of all, right? So we have this array, right? We can choose the houses we want to rob, but we just can't rob adjacent houses. So I'll explain at least a little bit about how we solved house robber 1. Basically, it's kind of dynamic programming, and you can watch the first house robber explanation if you want the basic, like the better explanation for it. But basically, okay, what's the max we can rob up until this point, right? That's 2, obviously, right? So we remember that. Okay, the max we can rob up to here is 2. Okay, what's the max we can rob up until here, right? Clearly, we have to make a choice. We can either rob 2, right, and then nothing from here, right? We don't rob here. And in that case, the max we could rob up until this point would be 2. But we know that rather than robbing house 2, right, we don't even carry this value forward. We just rob house 3, right? So then we can put a 3 here. So up until this point, the max we can rob is 3. Now, lastly, what's the max we can rob up until this point where we're looking at the entire array, right? Whatever value we put here is going to be our solution. So now we have 2 choices, right? We can rob house 2, skip 3, and then rob up until this point, right? And the value for here is 2, right? So 2 plus 2, we would get 4. Or we can make another choice. We can actually skip this house and just carry over the value that we computed before. What's the max we could rob from here, right? That's 3. We would just put the 3 here. Now, clearly, the first one that we computed was 4, so that's greater. The max we can rob for the entire array is 4. Now, I like house robber 2 because it requires us to reuse the solution from house robber 1 in a slightly clever way. It's not even about algorithms at this point. It's more about reusing the solution. It's about, you know, having a function. So the only restriction here, right, you see up here we robbed, like we were looking at, okay, what's the max we can rob from the entire array? The only restriction here is we can't use the same solution from here over here, right? The max we can rob from the first array is 4 with house robber 1, but with this, if we rob this, skip this, and rob this, we're not allowed to do that because remember the first and the last house is connected. Basically what I'm saying is if we rob house, like the first house, we can't rob this one. Or if we rob this house, we can't rob this one. How can we reuse the solution from up here? Let me show you. Let's say this is our helper function, right? House robber 1. We can basically say, okay, we can run house robber 1 on the entire array except the last value, right? And what's that going to give us? It's going to give us a 2, right? We can also run the house robber 1 helper function on the entire array except the first value, and that would actually give us a max rob of 3. I think for this one it would also be a max rob of 3, right? But basically what I'm saying is we have to run the helper function twice on different subarrays of our input array because we're not allowed to rob the first and the last house together. So if you actually understand house robber 1, right, the helper function that we're going to use, and you understand what I'm saying over here, right, where we're not allowed to rob both the first and last house, then all you have to do is call the helper function twice on these 2 subarrays, and whatever one is the max is the value we're going to return. You can see in this case, from the first array, the max you can rob is 3, right? If you rob 3 and skip the first house. And if you from the second array, the exact same thing is true because this is a pretty symmetrical array. So if you skip house 2 and rob this one, this 3, you also get a max rob of 3. So that's going to be the solution. But it could have been different technically, right? Maybe this could have been a 5, right? And in that case, the max you could rob from the first subarray would be 5, skip the 3. So then 5 would be our solution, right? And once you can basically identify this problem, it's pretty straightforward. And so since if you might remember, the house robber 1 algorithm is a linear time algorithm, O of n, all we're doing is calling that same algorithm twice, so the time complexity is going to be big O of n, right? And the memory complexity is going to be O of 1 because we don't really need any extra data structures for the most part. So now let me show you the code and it'll make a little more sense. So first, I'm going to create a helper function, right? Basically, what I'm going to put here is our solution from house robber 1. If you remember, we have two values, rob 1 and rob 2. Basically, these store the max amount you can rob from the previous two houses, right? And initially,
根本想不到，小刘。
什么东西啊？看答案。
对，根本就想不到啊。
我觉得一开始想不到，想着想着就想出来了吧。
并没有。
就是你不是自己也觉得状态比之前好很多了吗？对吧？
嗯。
不要放弃。
哎，定下你有。发东西了。
是啊。
有个人叫他老婆在评论里。
我看看。
是
个妹子。是个妹子。
男的。
男的吗？
在马来西亚。
真假的？肉肉老婆好，你怎么知道是男的？
他这这里面是男的呀。
哦，来，我来问问他。给我截个图。Unexpected left. Okay. 什么会这样呀？好奇怪啊！小猪，你能帮我看这个吗？我从来没有想过会有这种问题，太奇怪了，这个人。你看啊。他说，我不是就是截取了从这个 table 里面导出了就是这个结，等一下。什么情况？不应该啊。对，就导出了这个结果嘛。然后导出这个结果以后呢，我确定就是说在这个 table 里面也有一个这个东西，然后我就把它有 left join 一下嘛，对吧？
为什么忘记 left join right join 了？
这不重要，重要的就是说很奇怪的就是这里是有 account C 的哈，然后他跟我这样搞了一下，他就跟我说 invalid identifier account C， 在不知道为什么会这样，就是在这一行里面。
你的 account C 是 CA 的。
啊 ，CA 的。
是 CA 吗？
对，就是 CA 呀，就是这个 account C 嘛，account C 嘛，就觉得很奇怪啊，为什么会这样啊？
你把它注释掉，我看一下。
注释掉，把这个对吧 ？left join。这什么？
你局域型的一部分。
哦。
等于不是双等于的啊，就是一个单等于。
单等于的。不应该啊，我觉得好奇怪啊。
不知道哎。
但是这个我把这个 copy paste 到这边又是有的，我从来没有遇到过这种问题，太奇怪了吧？我就是想要这个 ID 嘛。
format.com 都是这个库名可以大写的啊，这个 table。
大小写没关系的。
语法也都对的。
对啊。
left join。
对啊，不可能不对啊。那这是
Salesforce collection。
撞鬼了。
这是哪里 ？Salesforce。不是，这个是哪里？
这个就是它里面的 borrow account ID 嘛。
对，在哪个地方？
你可以把它这样。而且他说是 invalid identifier， 就说明他找不到 account C。
你找不到 account C， 还是它 account C 里面有的 account C 的内容不对呢？有没有可能？
不，这应该是跟内容没关系的。就比方说他没有这个账号的话，他应该是就是一个空的，他就是出一个空的。这个就很奇怪啊，这两个玩意儿。你看我这样就，对， 这样他就说 invalid identifier。我如果这边加上 CA 呢？还是这个玩意儿？这个应该没关系啊。就是不行。
不知道。
好奇怪啊！真的好奇怪啊！我以前从来没有碰到过这种问题，而且就是我刚刚试了一个更傻的办法，就是说，我把它现在这一块这个东西单独作为一个 table， 对吧？单独把它作为一个 table， 然后我就 select everything from here。然后是有的，对吧？然后我就把它单独作为一个 table， 然后我把它 left join 这一块，还是不行。这样都不行，就很奇怪啊。
你把 C 删掉，你 C 点 account C， 把 C 删掉。
你是说把这里删掉啊？
把这个 C。
把这个 CA 删掉。
和这个点啊。
刚，这是我刚加的呀，这样也没用。这就很奇怪。这个太奇怪了，我
说一下，我忘记 left join 的语法是什么了。
left join 不会错呀。
就是这样的。
对啊，就 left join 一个东西 on 一个什么和什么就可以了，对吧？这个不可能错。我可以搜一下 left join invalid identifier。但是它一般就是不知道你在说哪个东西才会出这个 bug。啥意思这个？这什么鬼 ？Where 巴拉巴拉？哦，这什么东西？哦，这是它一部分。Everything in the join。in the join。
不知道。
这我怎么办啊？我拿不出他的 ID 了。
We can set them to 0, right? We can just assume that there's 2 random houses that come before our input array, and both of those houses are value 0, or, you know, however you want to call it. But we are going to have to go through every number in the input array.
很诡异啊，我觉得。 呀？为什么呀？我从来没遇到过这么奇葩的问题。那我怎么办？那我是让谁的？我想想看。有没有一种可能是 mat.com 不能够登，就是 mat 是不能够和 hero 合在一起的，就是两个 schema 一定要一样。
那我就不知道了，
有没有这种可能？觉得？
不知道了。
但我记得我之前好像也有合过的呀。太奇葩了。我们做个实验吧。Select everything from mat.com 然后 left join hero 到 Salesforce 到 long account C， 这个是long， 这个是 Salesforce long， 然后long 的ID 等于 Salesforce long 的 ID。是可以的呀，这个就没有报错呀，那我就不明白为什么了。我好绝望啊！怎么会这样子的啦？为什么呢？哦，难道是因为这个原因？这样再试一次，还是不行啊？太奇怪了，我太奇怪了。mat.com 的这样吧，那我倒是这样做一个试一下。waiting 叫做 hardship。
想不到系列。
waiting list as。
推送啊！推送。我去洗个澡，我们准备走吧。
好。
怎么明天洗嘛？回来再洗。
还是不行，我绝望了。我把它单独放到一个东西里面去，让它可以读出来，就我自己重新编辑了一个 table， 等于是，就是一个非常简单的5列的 table。但是我这样子还是不行。这是为什么？ 什么鬼？
哭吧小表。
但我可以。
So we're going to start with the easiest ones and then work our way to more difficult ones. If you want to check out the code, you can do so on the right-hand side. Every one of these problems will have a code solution, not only in Python, but you can choose any of the 4 supported languages, Java, JavaScript, and C++ as well. And if you're completely new to data structures and algorithms, I definitely recommend checking out some of the courses I have available for pro members. There's a 25% off launch sale going on right now. You can get a lifetime access plan, which will give you access to all current and future courses. Pretty soon I plan on doing system design and a lot of other things as well, like full stack web development and a lot more. Okay, without further ado, let's get started now. Hey everyone, welcome back, and let's write some more neat code today. So today let's solve climbing stairs. So this is going to be another dynamic programming problem, and this is definitely more on the easy side, definitely compared to some of the really hard dynamic programming problems that we've been solving recently. But I still think that this is a good problem to really understand the fundamentals, understand, the brute force, and taking that brute force, using memoization, and then of course getting the true dynamic programming solution. And by the way, if you don't already know, we have been tracking a list of blind 75 questions on this spreadsheet. So today we're going to be solving this dynamic programming one, the climbing stairs problem. So I will be adding the solution once this video is uploaded. And the link will be in the description if you do want to take a look at this sheet. So the problem statement is pretty simple. We're climbing a staircase and it's going to take us n steps to reach the top of the staircase. Every time we take a step, we have 2 So we're going to
choices of
start
how
with
we
the
can take a step.
easiest. We can either just take one single step or we can take 2 steps at once. And all we want to and then know work is our how way to many more different difficult ways ones. can we get to the top of the staircase. So let's look at the first example, n equals 2. That means we need to climb 2 steps. So we could draw the picture kind of like this, right? So let's say we start over here, right? This is step 0,
可以的
basically, when we
我
haven't
知道为
climbed.
什么了，
为什么呀？
因为它名字里面有一个杠 C，我把它改名字就可以了，
哪个名字啊？
就很奇怪。我把它改了个名字，就是我之前它不，我也不知道为什么，我就把它改了个名字就可以了。
是哪个名字啊？
它本来是这是CA 里面的叫 account C 嘛，对吧？
嗯。
但是我把它放到这边来，我把它改成名字叫 borrow account ID， 它就可以了。所以可能是 account C， 它是有一个专业的意思的，我觉得。
应该不是吧？杠 C 这个名字。
你看我如果把它变成 account ID， 然后 left join not account CA 的 account ID 等于 left borrow。这样还是不行哎，好奇怪啊。
嗯。来。
我真的觉得很奇怪耶。谢谢。怎么会有这种奇葩事情啊？我还是不理解为什么，虽然我把它修好了，但是我还是不理解为什么。算了，我不管了。但我真的不知道为什么。小猪，你说为什么啊？
我怎么知道？啊？我怎么知道？
这很奇怪啊。
那你直接 select account ID account C from 它，然后能出来吗？
什么意思啊？
你就让它打印出它的那个 account ID 那个东西来，你可能打印出来了。
什么意思啊？
你就是直接 select account ID 就这个，就可以吗？
可以打印出来啊。
这样是可以的。
对。一 left join 就傻逼了，但这边就很奇怪，我刚刚不是也不行吗？那我就给他们全部重命名了一下。
那就可以了。
哦，然后就可以了。很奇怪哎。我很好奇，如果我把这一条放到里面去的话，它还要可以吗？会不会挪作挪蛋？
是的。
我不管，我就要试一下。不行哎。不行了就。放到这里面去就不行了。但是我刚刚单独把它放在下面是可以的。放里面就不行了，我刚刚放这边是可以的，但我总觉得会不会再来一次又不行。有没有种可能是我给它的标记不行啊？不能用 CA 什么的？应该不至于吧？
不知道呀。
test 叫 TT。SID。
反攻！
哎，这样可以。
怎样？是怎样啦？靠背超奇怪的哈。真的是哎。
不过就在习近平前脚刚刚离开，中共国内就出现了异常的一幕。据报道，就在习近平出访当天，大陆以及海外多家媒体，如深圳晚报、深圳商报、网易、21世纪经济网、新闻网、早报网和联合早报等媒体，在同日下午相继推出一则内容差不多的辟谣报道。报道称，日前一些多媒体和医疗行业自媒体，甚至包括一些地方卫健疾控部门的新媒体账号发文称，动态清零将作为一项基本国策长期坚持下去。经查证，这一说法严重不实，是一个谣言。为什么说是谣言呢？报道指那些自媒体和新媒体称，这一说法来自中共。
所以是问题真的是出在 account C 上面。我怀疑是不是他们的数据类型不一样，可能一个是那个，一个是就是我换成 ID 就可以嘛。我换成 ID 它就可以连，所以我怀疑它可能是，就是说它的 account C 它不是一个标准的那个数据类型，就是他们可能不是字符串类型可能。
它是一个横杠还是两个横杠 account C？account
C 是一个横杠。难道是这个原因？哦，所以它是两个横杠的。哦。哦，好像真的。我操，你怎么那么牛逼啊！你果然是 bug 修 bug 大神，太厉害了！我就是不明白嘛，这太奇怪了。他搞两个 C 两个横杠干什么呀？这个人好奇怪哦。人家都搞你好厉害，小猪，小猪你太厉害了。我觉得你真的是天之骄子。小猪绝对是天之骄子，这个一般谁看得出来啊？
我其实看的有点长，我没有想到。
可以啊，可以，这个相当可以。
酸检测困在文字中的无数中国人的痛点。文章最后写道，在习刚刚出访就出现了上述诡异的一幕，这无疑在告诉世人，中共高层决定依然在持续。另一方面，上述报道和视频迄今没有被封杀，似乎透出习出国后对反其撤离动作的回应略显迟钝。一个可能的原因是，其心腹丁薛祥等人皆跟随出访，皆忙于应对峰会事宜，对于国内之事难以顾及。这是否说明真正忠诚于习且为之着想的中共高官实在是少之又少呢？此外，法广在亲临被指沦为习近平完全的打击，中人指出，海内外的舆论现在出现越来越多的把中共的亲临视为一种折腾百姓的残酷的表演，一种违法游戏，一种最高统治者习近平为了顺利连任压制党内外一切异议的极端手段。纽约时报的评论也指出，在充斥着封锁、隔离和大规模检测的不确定性的生活中，中国公众每天24小时不间断地举办着一场表演。这场表演的观众只有一个，中共最高领导人习近平。现在的情形恰如皇帝的新衣。世界卫生组织总干事谭德赛14日公开表示，世界范围内的新冠死亡人数上周达到2020年3月疫情爆发以来的最低点，显示几年来的全球疫情可能达到了转折点。谭德赛在日内瓦的记者会上强调，世界终止新冠病毒的形势从来没有这么好过，但终点已经在望。不过，谭德赛的这番表态显然又戳到了中共当局的痛点。谭德赛这一积极表态随后遭到中共当局的限流，网友纷纷把中共限流的截图发到微博上。综合报道，世界卫生组织在每周疫情报告中说，全世界上星期的死亡报告数字只有11000多人，下降了22%。世界各地新增病例是310万，下降28%，保持新冠病例几周来下降的趋势。世界卫生组织新冠病毒技术负责人范克霍夫也表示，该组织预计未来会出现病毒的多波发作，但这不会造成很多人的死亡。谭德赛的最新讲话在中国网民中引发热议，全班同学都放学了，曾经的第一名还在补课。谭书记的讲话击碎了很多渲染疫情多么严重的谣言。怎么可能结束呢？天朝的抗疫正处于如火如荼之中，抗疫产业也在蒸蒸日上。还有网民直言，这个新闻正被当局审查，可能会被秒删。随后，中共官媒故意淡化了谭德赛对终止新冠疫情努力胜利在望的乐观评估，而且相关消息还遭到中共当局的限流，随后引发了网友们的抱怨。话音未落，话题已经没了。我们国家真的牛，新浪微博也是个渣渣，这热搜硬是拉的没几个人知道，也没有几个大的新闻媒体发布这个消息。吃了深度过河了，仿佛在摸石头。卫健委刚发，动态清零是我们国策，你是为凭啥结束？问过我们了吗？记者还发现，少数几个路媒如《新京报》《中国新闻周刊》等报道了相关消息，却开启了评论精选，网友不能留言。正如有网友留言：“老谭啊，有这么个事儿，有些话可能还是你来说比较合适，对你看着办。”早在今年5月，谭德赛就曾批评中共的动态清零防疫政策不可持续，之后遭到中共外交部发言人的反驳，而谭德赛的相关发言在中国社会上也遭到封杀。查尔斯登基为英国国王后，哈里和梅根3岁的儿子亚契，还有1岁的女儿莉莉贝，渴望正式获得王子和公主的头衔。不过，据英国《每日邮报》15日报道，尽管查尔斯已同意要颁布英皇制诰，正式授予哈里夫妇的子女王室头衔，可能不会让他们享有被尊称为殿下的地位。据哈里夫妇最近几天和新国王进行紧张的对话后，两人为了子女不会获得殿下头衔而气炸。据他们强调，女王的儿子安德鲁和2位女儿虽然不是履行王室任务的成员，但都享有殿下的地位。一位消息人士告诉《太阳报》，哈里和梅根担心维安问题，而身为王子和公主并获得王室保全某种程度的权利。自女王过世后，近1星期以来，哈里夫妻就不断要求，可是因为亚契和莉莉贝得不到殿下头衔，就气呼呼地走了。事实上，英国王室和享有殿下称号的成员有限，是1917年英王乔治五世定下的规矩。不过，梅根先前曾宣称，亚契得不到殿下尊号是因为他身上没有非裔血统。报道指出，由于哈里和梅根选择淡出英国王室，远走美国定居，也不能用殿下的称号，甚至有人要求干脆褫夺了2人的萨塞克斯公爵夫妇头衔。美国一家媒体研究公司最近发表的一份报告说，广为美国和西方国家年轻人使用的社交媒体网站 TikTok 在呈现搜寻结果时，往往会提供虚假信息。该研究公司创始人怀疑这家中共拥有的社交媒体可能故意散布虚假信息，在美国和西方民主国家中制造混乱。新闻可信度评估与研究公司 Newsfront 14日发表的报告说，公司研究人员发现，当用户在 TikTok 上搜寻新冠疫情、气候变化或俄罗斯入侵乌克兰等重大事件时，接近1/5的搜寻结果呈现了虚假信息。他们发现 TikTok 搜寻引擎看来特意向用户建议含有虚假讯息的视频。该公司创始人史蒂文·布里尔怀疑，中国字节跳动公司拥有 TikTok 可能在有意散布虚假信息。除被指责散布虚假信息外，TikTok 还一直被认为在努力为北京收集美国和西方国家公民数据。据悉，美国总统拜登正在考虑颁布行政令，限制包括 TikTok 在内的中国互联网公司收集美国公民数据。 好了，以上是本期万物读报的全部内容，感谢大家的收看，我是 Cherry。如果你喜欢我们的节目，欢迎您点赞和转发我们的视频。我们下期节目再会。欢迎收看 Focus 国际话题，我是吴淑瑞。观众朋友，首先带您关心，随着中国大陆加大对台湾的压迫，还有俄罗斯发动战争，西方国家态度也出现转变。七大工业国贸易部长周四结束连续2天的会议，表示对中俄两国的态度将会更加强硬。这场贸易部长会议在轮值国德国来举行，强调会加强力道，防止俄罗斯从乌克兰战争当中获得经济利益。除了猛批俄罗斯之外，G7 贸易部长还把目标指向中国大陆，表示会防止北京利用经济实力压制其他国家。会后联合声明虽然没有直接点名中国大陆，但是有提到关注强制技术转移，还有窃取智慧财产权等等。这很明显了，这是把矛头指向北京。德国经济部长哈贝克也强调，对中国大陆的立场不再天真，不会再因为贸易而掉入不在乎社会和人道的标准里头。不过态度上的转变可能会让中俄两国更加强硬哦。普京跟习近平在乌兹别克展开普习会，普京强调会坚守一个中国的原则，还谴责美国跟盟邦在台海挑衅、选边站的意味非常浓厚。同坐在一个会议室，中国国家主席习近平跟俄罗斯总统普京终于碰面了。习普会在乌兹别克登场，这也是习近平在新冠肺炎疫情爆发后第一次的海外访问，因此备受瞩目。俄罗斯总统普京也很知道习近平要什么。跟中国大陆站在同一阵线，还不忘骂一下美国，尤其正值俄乌战争进入关键时刻，乌克兰大举反攻，收复大片东部土地。CNN 报道，普京打算借由这个机会开口请习近平帮忙。
5月14号晚，国家主席习近平乘专机抵达撒马尔罕。
比普京早一步，习近平前一天深夜抵达乌兹别克。而在习普会展开之前，俄罗斯国防部发布中俄两国海军在太平洋上联合巡航的画面。俄罗斯派出1艘护卫舰、3艘轻型护卫舰、1组海上游轮编队，大陆则派出1艘驱逐舰、1艘护卫舰和1艘综合保证船。这样的举动也被解读是向西方国家释放中俄同盟的讯息。
Инициатива была полностью поддержана, потому что это предоставляет обеим странам, и Китаю, и Узбекистану, огромные выгоды. Далее, сфера образования. Надо дальше увеличивать.
This is a computer, and I'm putting this computer in this computer, so I can control it from this computer or this computer. This is a computer, but it's also a PCI Express card that you install inside another computer. It's called a leetcode PCIe, and if you've never built a server before, you might be wondering why someone would want to put a computer in another computer. Well, in the server world, we call this an IP KVM. That stands for Internet Protocol Keyboard Video Mouse. Basically, a way to have a remote keyboard, video, and mouse connection to your computer over a network. And a lot of servers actually have these things built in. They're called IPMI, or if you're Dell, it's called iDRAC. My new Storinator has this extra network jack, and that's how I can remote control it even when it's shut down. But not all servers have that built in. And even if they do, sometimes you have to pay extra money to use them, or they just get super outdated, and it would be a security risk to keep it running on your network. So that's where this guy comes in. It runs open source software called PyKVM, and once I plug this thing into my computer, I can have what's called lights out management.
小刘，你的那
I
个
can
什么，
control everything, even if the computer's
你
powered
那个
off.
手机响了，
Boot it up.
好
Force it
来看一下啊。
to control it. And check the BIOS settings. I can even reinstall the entire operating system, all with this little Raspberry Pi powered card. But how does it work? I mean, it's a PCI Express card. Won't it shut off when you shut down the computer? Well, that's where it gets a little weird. See these pins? The only ones connected to anything are actually the ground pins. All the data pins are just kind of dangling here, not doing anything. So this card is a PCI Express card, but not really. It just uses the slot as a convenient place to mount itself inside a PC or server so you don't have a Raspberry Pi dangling off the back. The business end is back here. And in this tiny space, there's an HDMI and USB input, some activity lights, a USB-C power input, and a gigabit Ethernet port capable of using power over Ethernet to power the device. So technically, you could say that USB-C power plug is the cooling, but the heart of this card goes here. This is a Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4, and it's a whole computer on this tiny little board. I plug it into the side here, and it'll be the brains behind that. There's a lot going on here. Again, actually supplies a ton of accessories in the box, so you can get up and run right away. It even includes both the heatsink and the fan, so if your case has poor airflow, you can get more air to the Pi so it still stays cool. There's also this little OLED display that will tell you the IP address of PyKVM and other stats like CPU and memory usage. You can mount that anywhere you want thanks to this long OLED cable. But Jeff, I hear you say, how does it turn on and off your computer? You can't do that through PCIe. You're right. I mean, it's not even connected that way. And that's why there are these little pin headers on the front. This first header is for an internal USB connection, and the second header is for all the ATX front panel I/O pins.
小猪走吧，先带你去啊。
For where to plug in the power and activity
No.
LEDs, the power button, and the reset button. First, I'll plug the little USB header into one of my motherboard's USB 2.0 headers. Then, using this little bundle of cables, I can jump the signals from the motherboard to the card, then from the card to the actual PC front panel buttons and LEDs. So now I can still use the physical power button, but I can also press it without even touching it using PiKVM. So once I have all the front panel connections installed, and I plug in power and Ethernet, or just use power over Ethernet, the last thing I'm going to do on this PC is plug in HDMI. Now, with everything connected and my PC still turned off, I'm going to power up the leetcode. The little OLED display is completely optional, and in my case, I used it the first time I plugged in the leetcode, but I left it off after that since I haven't found a great place to stick it yet. I do love how the card has the Pi activity and power LEDs on the back, so it's easy to see if the card is powered on and active. Let's hop over to my Mac and we'll see how it works over the network. So I know that my IP address is 10.0.100.116 because that's what the little OLED display showed after I plugged the PiKVM into my network, and this is the PiKVM default login page, and the default username and password is admin, so I'll enter that. I should probably change that because that's very insecure. There's a guide for that on the PiKVM's documentation page. But if I go into KVM mode here, you'll see that there's nothing on the screen because the PC is currently powered off. But I don't have to go to the PC to turn it on because we have that ATX front panel power button connected. So I can just go up here to this menu, the ATX commands, and click power. And when I do that, the PC will turn on, and then in a few seconds, this should switch over and show us the signal. In my case, I plugged the PiKVM into the HDMI, the second port on my video card. So right now there's nothing on the screen, and that's because over on the PC, there's actually the Windows login page, and for some reason, that doesn't show up on your extended displays, and that's how this showed up by default in Windows. So on the PC, I'm going to log into it, and what's funny is I can actually do it through here. So I'm on the extended display, but my keyboard and mouse are going through. So if I click, it brings up my login, and I'll type in my password, and I'm doing this all from my Mac right now. So what I need to do is go to the main display and change my display settings to mirror my primary display to the secondary display. On the headless server, you can just plug the leetcode straight into your main monitor output. But on here, I'm going to mirror the displays so that I can see everything on the main display on the actual KVM. So I'm going to go to display settings, and just going to go to duplicate these displays, make changes, and now you can see over on my Mac, I can see that I'm able to control the desktop. It looks like the resolution is correct, and I'm scrolling up and down, and that's working. So everything is working now for remote control. And if I were to shut down this computer, I could boot it right back up without having to go to the PC because I can do all these buttons. A few other cool things about the PiKVM interface is you can have different shortcuts you can send over. Let's say you're on your keyboard or you're on a phone or a tablet or something, you can send these shortcuts to do different things on the PC. You can also send text as a key press sequence, which is nice because, especially if you're on a tablet or mobile device, you might not be able to enter text like a normal keyboard correctly, so this lets you do that. You can also record macros, so you can do something like, press power button, do something, wait a little bit, do something else. You can also mount devices, so you can have an ISO file, an ISO, that you can mount as if it were plugged in as a USB flash.
走吧。
稍微等一下，小红书有人过来拿个东西。
All kinds of controls on here.
反正他5点
I'll
半
show you
关
the
门。
PiKVM status, like when you're actually sending mouse activity, the mouse lights up. When you're sending keyboard keystrokes, that'll light up as well. And you can twiddle with these settings too. You can change the quality and set things so that you get a little bit lower latency or higher latency for better quality, that kind of thing. There's also a on-screen keyboard that you can bring up, and you can do anything that you could normally do with a desktop keyboard on here, which is nice, especially if you're on a mobile device or a tablet or something. This can come in really handy. And there's also a remote screenshot capability, so I can hit screenshot, and it just saves the current screen as an image, which is really handy sometimes. If you don't want to use the built-in screenshot utility on a remote computer, or if it's locked up, you can grab a screenshot and the computer isn't able to do anything. That's very useful for debugging. And the last thing I'll talk about a little bit is this kind of setup is not ideal for things like gaming. Just to show a quick demonstration of that, it's not bad, it's not horrible, but the latency will kill you literally if you're playing FPS like I do. The latency is usually between 100 to 300 milliseconds, and you're not going to be able to get headshots at that rate in any kind of competitive gaming. So this isn't a great solution for remote gaming on a really beefy computer or something like that. You can use other tools like Parsec or something else for that kind of use case. You can also go full screen. If I do that, my browser capture might break, so I'm not going to go full screen. But if we go in here and hop into game, I'm not an expert level amazing Halo Infinite player, and actually there's only like 3,000 Halo Infinite players in the world right now because nobody plays the game.
Emotional damage.
That's interesting. I can't throw it.
什么是？ 好好
The
笑。
PC mouse I can actually move around, but on the remote session, the mouse is not actually doing anything. So I can jump and stuff. The latency here is terrible. I'm gonna get out my camera and I'll show you the difference in the latency between these two. So So I got the camera recording now, and I will show you the latency difference here. So you can see I'm moving around. We're getting 60 frames per second on the main display, but on PyKVM it's not amazing at all. You can see it's just the latency here between these two displays. This is coming straight from the PC's video card, and this is through the KVM. It's unplayable if you're trying to do FPS over PyKVM. I should note I didn't install a heatsink here just because I didn't have a ton of clearance, but the Pi did throttle when I had the side panel on, so you'll definitely want to use the included heatsink or fan. Now, this thing isn't for everyone. A lot of people just use remote desktop or VNC if they want simple remote access, and it's not going to be dedicated apps like Parsec for gaming or remote editing performance. But if you need full remote access and lights-out management and don't have IPMI or iDRAC already, this is a great option. It's a little expensive, but a lot cheaper than most external IP KVMs. And with a base model CM4 like this one, it's cheaper than ASRock Rack's PAL card. The Blue KVM PCM can be powered over Ethernet and has a few other external I/O options, but the PAL has more internal options for full-fledged servers like internal sensors and SM bus monitoring for server power supplies. These types of cards aren't the only reason you might put a computer in your computer either. Sir Nagels on Twitter got this MicroTik DPU, which is basically a dual 25 gigabit router on a board running on a Raspberry Pi also. Granted, it only got 3 gigabits of throughput on the Pi, but a KVM isn't the only computer people run inside other computers. And there are a few other things I didn't mention while I was testing the Blue KVM. It also comes with helpful accessories like a VGA to HDMI adapter, since a lot of servers, even brand new ones, don't have HDMI. It also has this little HDMI sync that can be useful if you need to lock in an HDMI resolution on your server. It also comes with a low-profile bracket for smaller PC cases and shorter 2U servers. It uses about 2 to 3 watts idle and 4 to 6 watts when you're remoted in controlling the screen. As I showed in the video, the latency is terrible for remote gaming or real-time use, but it's fine for most other use cases. You can get up to 10 Mbps at 60 Hz with it. You can buy it from AliExpress for a little over $100 without a Pi, or they even sell a kit with a marked up CM4 for a little over $200. Blue KVM sent me this card.
小区房间有没有干净很多啊？
It didn't pick anything, and it didn't have anything to say about how
开人呢
this video. If you want to
把
buy
这里里面的卖了收了就更
keep
加
checking
干
our
净。
computer until you find one that lists.
它应该在床底下。
I should also mention the Tiny Pilot and PyKVM V3, which I reviewed last year, and my dad and I reviewed the original Blue KVM that was based on a Raspberry Pi 4 over on my second channel. My website just got DDoSed, and at first I thought it might have just been a DOS or denial of service attack, where one person sends a bunch of traffic and makes it so the website is so overloaded it can't respond to every request. But after digging through my logs, I found it was definitely a DDoS, or distributed denial of service attack. There were thousands of computers around the world hitting my website with over 3,000 requests per second. In this video, I'm going to run through what happened, talk about how I got my site back online, and what I learned in the process. And I'll also briefly discuss how all this relates to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, so stay tuned to the end for that. On February 9th at 9 a.m., I posted a new video to my YouTube channel. The video showed how I was hosting my website on a farm on a cluster of Raspberry Pis using a 4G LTE internet connection. In the video, I said this: even if my website gets hit by a lot of traffic from Reddit or Hacker News, it should stay up and running. The only major risk is if a lot of people post comments at the same time, because all that traffic has to go through to the cluster, so the comments get saved in the site's database. So yeah, maybe I should have to fake there. I was worried about a bunch of legitimate users hitting the site and posting comments at the same time, but since I've been running my website now for more than 10 years without a DDoS, that wasn't even something on my radar. So I posted that video, and after a bit, I posted a link to a blog post on Hacker News. Within a few minutes, I saw the story hit the front page on HM, which was a bit weird with how quick it rose to the front. And as usual, the traffic on the site went up a bit, with over 150 visitors on the site at 10 a.m. Blog posts from my site have hit HM's front page in the past, so I knew what to expect, and the cluster was handling it fine. This graph shows the slow rise in traffic to the back end as some users were commenting and hitting pages on the site that weren't cached by my VPS. I was responding to some comments on YouTube when I got this email from Up10 Robot. Jeff Geerling was down. That was around 10:41 Central Time. I saw a huge spike in traffic on the VPS that was proxying the Pi cluster. That's this graph of requests from Nginx. The monitoring stopped working once the server was overloaded, but before that happened, Munin could see over 2,000 requests per second. I also saw a pretty sharp rise in traffic hitting the Pi cluster, but each of the Pis were actually handling the requests fast enough. Kubernetes was still responsive, so I knew the problem was up on my VPS. We were just 10 minutes in at this point. I logged back into my VPS and noticed its load was really high, and it was basically stuck with hundreds of PHP FPM threads trying to handle requests to the Drupal backend on my Pi servers. That was definitely the bottleneck, and somehow whoever was sending this traffic was busting through my cache layer. PHP just couldn't keep up, so most requests were timing out. I live-tailed the Nginx logs and saw thousands and thousands of requests whizzing by. Someone was sending thousands of these post requests through to my site, and I ran a command to sort requests by IP address and found that it was definitely a DDoS, because these requests were coming from all over the world. Tracking individual IPs, I saw most requests at this point were coming from Indonesia, Russia, and Brazil, among hundreds of other countries. At this point, I knew I needed to save some of this data off so I could sort through it later, so I started screenshotting everything, and I opened up a text file to dump everything I found. The first thing I learned many years ago, the first time I dealt with a major traffic spike for an enterprise website, was always document everything that's happening for two reasons. First, you'll need it later when you try to figure out exactly what happened and how to prevent it from being a problem in the future. And second, it usually helps your brain to slow down a little so it can piece together what to do next. In my case, the first thing I tried was blocking IPs in Nginx's configuration. Initially, most requests were coming from one IP in Germany, but after I blocked that, 10 more rose up in its place. I also tried adding rate limiting to my Nginx config using the limit request feature, but that was tricky to get right, and I ended up causing other problems for other people visiting the site. So instead of spending hours playing whack-a-mole with IPs, I decided to put my site behind Cloudflare. I already used Nginx to cache and proxy my Pi cluster, so it would be somewhat shielded from a direct DOS attack, just a smaller one, but my single VPS in New York couldn't handle the full onslaught of a DDoS attack punching through the cache. So once I switched my domain's DNS to Cloudflare, my brilliant IP blocks actually got in the way because I ended up blocking the Cloudflare servers too. Oops. What I ultimately did was drop the IP blocking in Nginx, and instead I set up a DigitalOcean firewall rule that only let Cloudflare servers access my VPS. With that, I could make sure all the traffic hitting my website went through Cloudflare. If I left the server exposed, attackers could still hit the server directly if they knew its IP address, so I had to close it off entirely. Once I got the firewall running and added the page rule on Cloudflare to cache everything on my website, I was still seeing thousands of requests per second. So I went into Cloudflare's firewall rules and added a complete block on all post requests, at least until I could get things in order. Within 30 minutes of that, Cloudflare had blocked almost 6 million post requests, and my site was finally stable. Before that, my core VPS was getting hit with over 3,000 post requests per second. No wonder it couldn't cope. Both Munensgraphs and Cloudflare showed that the attack was a sustained 40 megabits per second coming from all over the world. Now, my server could handle that much raw traffic if it were all legitimate, like a front page post on Hacker News and Reddit, but because it was all post requests, the server got crushed trying to run PHP for each request. So at this point, it was about noon and it was lunchtime. I decided to document everything else I did in a GitHub issue and take a break to eat. Nobody could comment on my website, and I couldn't even log in right now, but I needed a break and some food. After lunch, I checked back in, and it looked like the attacker finally gave up. So I switched the post blocker to not block everyone, but still use a challenge to slow down bot attacks. So now people could actually comment on the site, but some of them might have to solve a CAPTCHA. But it wasn't over yet.
Mama.
I have a relatively complex user
还没来那个
I
人。
had to clean up some messes. First of all, some users on Twitter noticed some of my subdomains were offline. They're on different servers, but when I migrated my DNS to Cloudflare, it didn't include any subdomain records. Hey, though I had to add back records for sites like ansible.jeffgaming.com and my PyPCI Express website. But then I realized I couldn't save new blog posts on my site because Cloudflare's proxying interfered with the complex post requests Drupal uses to prevent unauthorized access. So I had to set up a separate edit domain, something that's actually pretty common with large-scale Drupal sites that have to deal with multiple proxy layers like I do now. After that, people started reporting they were seeing duplicate stories from my site in their newsreaders. Yes, RSS is alive and well, and yes, I still hate that Google killed Reader. So I've been cleaning up all the fallout, and in the end, I decided to power off the Pi servers at my house, for now at least. Since I'm using Cloudflare anyways, I might bring it back up again, but using Cloudflare tunnels next time. I mentioned that feature in my farm hosting video, but I didn't want to use it because it meant I'd have to use another third-party service and rely on that. But, I mean, if I'm going to start getting hit by regular DDoS attacks, I kind of can't do that on my own anyways. Speaking of which, after I relaxed my post rule, a day later, I got another DDoS attack. As you can see from this graph, I quickly detected it and amped up the post rule again until the attack stopped. This time, the traffic was coming mostly from Indonesia, China, Russia, and Brazil. That attack was almost a non-issue, but another attack that was a bit longer hit over the weekend on a Sunday during some family time when I wasn't checking my notifications. So 3 attacks in a week after a decade with 0. Cloudflare served up over 25 million requests, and that was after that first hour of my VPS trying to stay alive on its own that first day. In the end, Cloudflare served over 300 gigabytes of traffic over a period of a few hours during those attacks. By my estimation, if I'd left the Pi cluster running over 4G and didn't have any caching on my VPS, that would have cost me $1,400 in data charges. Luckily though, I'm not an idiot, so I didn't leave it running in that configuration since the day I released the video, and I've kept my wireless usage under my plan's limits. The attacker hasn't come back again, but I decided to leave Cloudflare in place because at this point my site has enough visibility that more attacks are bound to happen. So now that I've had this time to go through the data and clean up some of the mess, I have some thoughts. First of all, time and time again, every time I've encountered something like this, good monitoring and alerting is the first line of defense, and without it, I would be completely blind. When I helped build a commerce platform for some of the most popular music artists in the world, we had detailed graphs of everything on every level. And we had days that were way worse, with hundreds of thousands of legitimate requests within seconds of a merch drop. For that, I also had the budget to just throw hardware at the problem. But still, without the right monitoring, we would have lost millions of dollars in sales per year if it took too long to find the exact problem. Instead, we only had a few minutes of downtime here and there and helped the development team fix a few bugs that made the stores scale much more quickly. On my personal projects, I've been using Munin since around 2006, and it's chugged along without any issues, giving me insights from a separate monitoring server, so I can still react even if my main servers go offline. For enterprise projects I've worked on, when budgets are more than $5 or $10 a month like I have, I've been able to use monitoring services like Sumo Logic, Datadog, New Relic, or Splunk. You can also self-host tools like Prometheus and Grafana, Zabbix, or even Munin like I'm using here. It all depends on what you need and what you can invest in. But in the end, you need monitoring. You need insights into exactly what's happening on your servers. The second thing I've learned is that I need to adjust my appetite for risk, at least a little. For years, I've run a bunch of services out of my homeland, and I've been pretty cavalier with showing how they work. I'm kind of open source by nature, and while I keep things secure and up to date, it's practically impossible to prevent DDoS attacks against public IPs unless you route everything through CDNs or have unlimited bandwidth, which, because of Spectrum, I definitely don't. I should probably be a little more careful about IP addresses and specific references in my public repos. But I won't stop doing any of this stuff because it's just too fun to share it with everyone. But what does any of this have to do with the war in Ukraine? Well, right now, in addition to soldiers on the battlefield, Ukraine and Russia are also in the midst of probably the largest IT war ever waged. All around the world, there's been organic resistance to the Russian invasion through DDoS attacks on crucial Russian websites. It's gotten to the point where the Russian government is basically throwing up a massive firewall around the country and giving up trying to mitigate the constant barrage of traffic. How does it work? Well, one educational example is the UA Cyber Shield project on GitHub. In the description, it states that they don't support unlawful attacks on anyone else's website, and that the software is provided only for educational purposes. But, well, I'm guessing there's at least a few people in the world who aren't only testing their own website with tools like this. But the point is, this Cyber Shield software is one of thousands of small programs that people are running, both for good and for bad, on computers all around the world. Most of the computers running DDoS tools are part of botnets, though. They're not intended to be this way, but they're computers, routers, and even smart devices around the world that have been hacked and send a barrage of traffic at their targets. And I just so happened to be in the crosshairs of one of these botnets a few weeks ago. Unless you have the bandwidth and resources to black hole all the traffic like Cloudflare does, you have no option but to basically go offline for a while until the traffic stops. And even these providers like Cloudflare have their limits. Google, Amazon, Azure, and Cloudflare have all stopped historic DDoS attacks in the past few years. Attackers are constantly adapting, and it doesn't help that the internet is now flooded with more hacked IoT smart devices and old hacked routers and other things every day. The backbone of the internet still has some ugly flaws that make things like DDoS attacks too easy for the attacker, and hard, if not impossible, for the defender. I don't really like the centralization of all internet traffic around services like Cloudflare, AWS, and Google, but it's practically the only way to keep a website online nowadays if you have any notoriety at all. Anyways, now you know why I haven't gotten a graphics card working on my Pi yet. This is 1.2 petabytes of hard drives, and this is a Raspberry Pi. And using this giant server, I'm going to plug all 60 hard drives into this one Raspberry Pi and build the Petabyte, or a Petabyte, or Petabyte. Let me know in the comments what you want to call these things. For now, I'm calling it the Petabyte Pi project. A lot of people said this will never work, but there's only one way to find out. And to get to today, I had to solve a lot of problems. The chip in the Raspberry Pi was never meant for this kind of thing. It only has a tiny bit of bandwidth, and the thing it uses to communicate with the hard drives, its PCI Express bus, might not even be able to work with all the drives. Last year, I worked with Broadcom engineers to patch the Linux kernel to get 16 drives working. But getting 60? Well, that adds another layer of complexity. And what about power and space for the drives? Well, luckily, I have this Storinator for that. And you might notice I'm in the workshop. I couldn't even fit this thing in my office where I normally record, so I had to boot out Redshirt Jeff and film here. But since I felt sorry for kicking him out, I made sure 45 Drives threw him a bone with the front panel sign. I think he approves. Once we get all the drives working, if we get all the drives working, we're also going to have to deal with the Pi's networking bottlenecks. I guess I should make it obvious right away. Don't try this at home. Not that many people have 60 hard drives and a Storinator sitting around, but there's a reason 45 Drives doesn't sell a Storinator Pi. It might work, but it's gonna bottleneck. Before we get into hardware, I need to put into perspective how massive a petabyte is. I could download all of Wikipedia on here, 50,000 times. My NAS, the one I loaded up with 8 terabyte hard drives, that thing is 40 times smaller than this petabyte of storage. Of course, it's going to be a while before normal home users, or heck, even S-tier data hoarders, deal with petabytes. Just having somewhere to plug in all the drives is hard, and that's why I called up 45 Drives. They build a range of storage servers, and their biggest one is this one, the Storinator XL60, and it is massive. I mean, look at this thing. Full disclosure, somehow I convinced 45 Drives to send me the server and all these hard drives. They told me they want to see what wild and crazy things I can do with it, but I had to promise the insurance company I wouldn't let Redshirt Jeff hear it. I was thinking about unboxing it on camera, but FedEx already did. Luckily, nothing was damaged, in spite of this box completely missing one of its corners. If I pop the top cover off, you can see slots for 60 hard drives. And if you just pop the drives in, you don't even need a tray to hold them. And looking closely inside, it looks like they even have some 3D printed parts in here. After I pop off the back cover, you can see a 26-core Xeon CPU, a Supermicro server motherboard with 7 PCIe slots, a dual 10-gigabit Ethernet card, 256 gigs of RAM, and we're going to rip it all out. Sorry to whoever cable managed this thing. It looks great right now, but it's going to get a little messy. First, I took out the boot SSDs after making sure one had an identifying mark from the factory. Then, when I pulled the network card, what I do like is it looks like all the screws in their chassis are the same thread. So I can mix and match these screws. Standards. It says Phillips. It's nice to have those screws. If Apple built this thing, it would probably be 5 different kinds of screws, and half of them would be pendulum. I unplugged the ATX and CPU power connections, plus a little purple connector that I have no idea what it's for. Then I went to unplug the HBA drive connections and realized they're in a weird order. Looks like they have C, A, B, D in the order of these codes. It's not as intuitive as you'd hope. It's probably important for a storenator, since 45 Drives has a fancy dashboard that can show where the drives are physically located in the system. But the ordering won't matter on the Pi. Even the motherboard screws are the same. Nice. That is nice. And it's especially nice because there are so many screws here. Server motherboards seem to have more screws than the standard ones. Captain Obvious there, but it is interesting. A lot of PC builds I've seen only have like 6 screws holding the motherboard, and there can be an awful lot of board flaps. ProtoCase, the division that actually stamps out these cases, embeds studs in every position, so there are 9 screws total. Sorry, someone's screaming. I need to use my static protection. Here's your anti-static wristband. You don't even ground the anti-static mat you're using. So instead of all that enterprise-grade hardware, we're going with this. This Raspberry Pi Compute Model 4 has a 4-core ARM CPU, 1 PCI Express lane, 1 gigabit Ethernet, and a paltry 8 gigabytes of RAM. I'm going to put it on this I/O board. Then I'm going to use this PCI Express switchboard to plug in 4 of these. This is an enterprise-grade RAID card, and what's funny is this one is actually a little newer than the ones that came with the store name. Some people told me I should go the easy route, and instead of using 4 of these HBAs, I could use a thing called a SAS expander and plug all the drives through that. But the Storinator's custom backplane boards down here that plug all the drives in, it might not work that way. Plus, I wanted to see if a Pi could handle enterprise-grade storage, and if you want the best performance, you're going to use 4 of those fancy RAID cards, not a bunch of expanders. I 3D printed the ATX adapter plate for the I/O board, and drilled out the ATX mounting holes to a 1/4 inch, so they'd slip over the Storinator's motherboard standoffs. That thing lets me mount the Pi, so all the I/O goes out where a normal motherboard's I/O is. I also 3D printed an I/O shield, but because of a little thread screw that was stuck in the case, the I/O board stands a little proud and the I/O shield won't fit, so I just tossed it. More airflow, right? But when I went to put in the PCI Express switch, I realized the thing is actually pretty big with the wide spacing between the slots. This will be interesting. I'm literally going to have it on top of the Pi. That's okay. I grabbed a little piece of cardboard to insulate the boards from each other, at least temporarily. But I also had to get a Molex power connection to each slot on the switchboard, and that means the power supply cable management had to go. Alright, let's snip these. Power supply had 2 Molex power connectors, but that was it. So I didn't have enough power connections, so I hope that I have enough connections. So I'm going to go SATA to Molex for 2 of these. Since that's what this board needs. I finished wiring up the power, then plugged in the USB 3 cable adapter that goes from the Pi's by 1 slot to the switchboard's input. That doesn't blow out pretty good. Indeed. After I got that sorted, I started plugging all the backplanes into the HBAs. So the fun thing is, for the Pi, this doesn't matter too much. What matters is getting them plugged in. So I am going to try to get these organized. But if they aren't, it's not the end of the world. In the end, I didn't really get them organized. I just made sure they all clicked into one of the 3 ports. Click, but it's in. Well, maybe except for that one. The next thing I need is a power switch to be able to turn on everything. And that's because the I/O board doesn't have an ATX power header. So to turn on the power supply, I can either jump the right pins on its ATX header or use a fancy switch like this one. Unfortunately, it looks like the leads on the switch are soldered, so I couldn't get it to slide into the power button hole. I'll just have to have it dangling. Oh well. The last thing left is to install the actual Pi Compute module. Compute module 4 goes here. I think that's everything. I should make it clear, before I started this build, I did do some testing already at my desk with 4 HBAs and 1 hard drive plugged into each one. And if you think that looks messy, just think what it would look like if I plugged in 60 drives that way. But I did that 4-drive test, and I made sure the drives would at least power up, be recognized, and work together in RAID 0 array. With that set up, I got about 416 megabytes per second. So I think this will work, but like I said, the only way to know is to test it at scale. Alright, here we go. This is the fun part. Well, it's fun, but then the problem is to move this, I'll need to take them all back out. Hard drive's 45 drive set are Seagate Exos X20 drives. And you might think about jamming any old drive in a system like this, but you shouldn't, even if you're using a Pi. The performance and warranty are typically better on enterprise drives, but that's not usually as important for someone building massive storage arrays. The two most important features are reliability and how many hard drive bays are supported. These drives have a 550 terabyte per year and 2.5 million hour MTBF rate. Assuming they don't fail right away, they only have a 5-year warranty though, so don't focus too much on the MTBF. In fact, Seagate says they focus more on AFR, or annual failure rate, instead. I love reading Backblaze's hard drive reliability reports, and sure, Seagate isn't always on top, but most of the models are pretty reliable. But even if we had the worst drive ever, that's the whole point of a system like this. There are 60 drives in there. We should set them up with redundancy because with hard drives, it's not a question of if one fails, but when. That's why I'm going to need to work out a new plan for backing up a whole petabyte, because even if all this expensive hardware works great, I still need a 3-2-1 backup if I want my data to be safe. The second important thing is how many drive bays are supported. Not every hard drive can run inside a store unit. If you look at the specs on a desktop drive, they don't even say how many drive bays are supported because they're just not built to handle vibrations you get in a server like this. Even Ironwolf Pro drives are only rated for up to 24 bays per server, so they wouldn't be a good choice. The Exos drives, you can put
Hello, Lena speaking.
no limit, except for the size of your rack. And as an added bonus, these enterprise
Oh
drives,
yeah, have you arrived?
they're filled with helium instead of air.
Okay, cool. I'll open the door now. Alright, see ya.
我上个厕所，困了，我刚才睡着了，你知道吗？
你真的睡着啦？
晚上出去吃吗？
啊，应该是的。
那我们去看花还是接小冯呢？
好呀，都不接小冯，小冯直接去倒霉路可能。虽然他没跟我确认，我是这么跟他讲的，他没回我。